It's Tuesday, that means it's Trading Tip Tuesday. Let's take a look at some information on RSI for BraveNewCoin. So RSI is an oscillator which I've talked about in varying capacities in the past, but it's one way to measure or help understand overbought and oversold momentum. It's a way to think of it as more of a probability of outcomes rather than a certainty. A sliding scale of this can get more and more and more overbought. Eventually, this thing has to pull back based on math, based on what's going on with the underlying equation. So it was created in 1978, fairly new to the game of technical analysis, even though for the most part, it's kind of a de facto piece of TA you see on charts these days. Like it says here, provides signals for bullish bearish, plotted beneath the graph of an asset's price oftentimes, and overbought above 70, oversold below 30. And it's important to not think of that as absolutes. Again, this is probabilities and potential outcomes. This isn't when it's above 70, I sell everything. When it's below 30, I buy everything. It's when it gets above 70, I think about selling. When it gets more and more above 70, I think more and more about selling. And then I look for divergences. And then I think more and more about selling, right? Things can stay overbought for weeks. Things can stay oversold for weeks, although not often. More oftentimes you see things stay overbought than stay oversold. There's a general propensity for stuff to just be bullish all the time. And I'm not going to go into the details of the formula, but here it is. You can dig into it further should you so choose. And like I already said, you're going to see it usually on the bottom of charts, but you can put this anywhere you want. It doesn't really matter. This is all modular on TradingView anyway. You're usually going to see the 14 setting selected on the daily chart. So that is a 14 period RSI. It's also important to note that 14 calculation is based on closes, not wicks, not anything in between this daily, in this case, selected time frame. So that's why I like using RSI with the line chart, or if you're using it with anything else, just make sure you're cutting off wicks, because RSI doesn't calculate based off of wicks. I oftentimes like to add a 50 line in here as well as part of the overbought, oversold seesaw when things are bullish, bearish, leaning one way or the other. Oftentimes you'll see momentum reset. If things are bullish and pull back, you'll often see RSI pull back to the 50, as Bitcoin is now. And if things are oversold, you'll see things pull back to the 50 oftentimes before having another leg. For me as a trend trader, I particularly like paying attention to RSI during the extremes of trends. I don't like paying attention to RSI or pay attention to it less during times of low volatility, consolidation. It's often noisy and doesn't really tell me much. Maybe there are people who are using it differently, but it doesn't really tell me much. One thing you can do is adjust the settings. So you can always either adjust the settings of an indicator or adjust the time frame. In this case, this is the RSI of 30. You can just see the difference of signal to noise between the two. And what you're kind of looking at here is like the 4-day version of the RSI. The reason I chose 30 instead of 28, sorry, the 2-day version. The reason I chose 30 instead of 28, if you just take a full month versus 2 weeks, 4 weeks, however you want to think about that, whatever works for you. That's the bottom line with settings on anything. Use whatever works for you. There's some argument to be made about using what other people are using so that you're seeing the same signals they're seeing. Sure, I guess. But if an RSI of 75 works best for you, do it. If an RSI of 7 works best for you, do it. Most of the time you're going to see RSI at 14, but you can always double it and see interesting things that you may not be able to see at 14. And oftentimes on higher time frames, I like to add just like a dead man zone or a no man's land, however you want to think about that, where historically price hasn't really stayed most of the time. For BTC, that's between 50 and 55 on the RSI. Bottom of the uptrend is usually around 55 on the RSI. And you can see when things flip back and forth, trend usually flips back and forth, which is why I like paying attention to it at those levels. But throughout 2016 to 2018, this thing just cruised, just spiked to overbought over and over and over and over again. The danger is always when this thing hits like 95 plus or 25 or lower. You know, those are the danger zones of being overbought, oversold. But even on this chart, you can see for the most part, this thing does not stay overbought on the week, or sorry, oversold on the weekly for any period of time. So that's something else you got to like for each chart, each coin, think about historically what has happened on RSI here. we can stay overbought for months, and we very rarely stay oversold for more than a week as far as below 30. And usually when we flip the 50% zone one way or the other, that's a trend determining factor. I just like to use RSI with other stuff, chart patterns, MAs, Pitchfork, whatever. I'll talk about some of that as well. ETH, very similar. For the most part, it's never been oversold, other than this one time in 2018. So if that ever happens again, look to sentiment, look to moods, but also look to RSI. If RSI is 20, that's probably going to be a good buy historically on the weekly if we ever get that low, right? And if RSI gets to 95, be careful. And that it wasn't even necessarily the top. It just said this thing needs to chill out a little bit, right? It retraced all the way to 55, consolidated, and went again. And we're seeing a lot of that on Solana, AVAX, Terra, Luna, whatever, some of these charts. This is just an example of RSI during consolidation. You don't hear people talking about it often because for me, there's no signal here. I don't even know what I would be looking at as sort of a buy signal. And you'll see this over and over and over again. Here's consolidation in 2018, no real signal here. Maybe you could argue patterns form on the RSI along with price, which you see sometimes, but not always. Something else to watch for is, are we in a macro RSI trend, like a multi-month RSI trend? You'll see these convex concave trends often when we're in these multi-month bull or bear trends. And what you don't want to do is be on the other side of this from the momentum game. As price is going higher, you're getting higher highs on RSI, great. But eventually we hit a tipping point where we stop getting higher highs on RSI and we start to slow down. And sometimes you get higher highs in price, lower highs in RSI. That's an obvious bearish divergence. But when this thing starts to plateau, that's a signal. We're usually closer to the end of that trend than the beginning at that point. And based on probabilities, again, you think, okay, I'm still fully long, max leverage from the bottom. RSI is telling me be careful up here. We've plateaued. We've triple topped on RSI, right? Yeah, we're consolidating here. Yeah, this could push up. But at the very least, it tells you momentum is different here than it was at the bottom, right? Probability says this thing can't go forever. Based on math, this thing is probably going to relax a little bit. And if it doesn't, it's going to make a higher high. And I'm going to see that on RSI. But it's just a sanity check to see what's going on. Here's Solana. Okay, very similar situation from January to May. And it's easier to see this in hindsight. But the key is to watch this as it's happening, to map this out as it's happening, obviously. These educational videos are, you can think of them as backtesting for hindsight. But not only did you get this curvature, but you had a series of bearish divergences, higher highs in price, lower highs in RSI. So momentum was lower with higher highs in price. We're seeing that again here on these highs. Does that mean this is the top? Maybe. Does that mean you should short it all to zero? Probably not. Does that mean you should probably take some profit here? Not investment advice, but yeah, probably should. I think it's down to 108 or something. I don't know. It's down as of this chart anyway. But again, you're thinking, okay, previous RSI on this top was 90. What are the probability? What are the odds that this thing has another leg to above 90? Not zero, but probably pretty low. And eventually you put in that top. Eventually you get a lower high in RSI. And that tells you, yeah, be careful up here. If I'm still mega long or if I'm long from the top, be careful because there is a divergence here in momentum. Momentum is slowing down at the top. The pendulum is swinging in the opposite direction that you want to be if you are long up here. And this is on the daily. This can change dramatically on any time frame, but I like the daily for the most part. And if you're looking for bullish divergences, I like multi-month, just squeezes trends, charts, patterns rather. This is just a great one on ZeekBTC. You don't see these too often, but when you do, it's like, yeah, okay. Now's probably a pretty good time to roll into this one, regardless of how you feel about the coin relative to the other coin. The tech is telling you RSI hit like 11 or whatever this was in May 2019, and then RSI could not get lower than that despite price cruising at lows. Eventually, probability is this thing's going to retrace. Eventually going down is going to be the path of most resistance, and this thing is going to pop back up. This could take months, as it did in this case, but probability is on your side, at the very least to start rolling into something like this. This isn't catching knives. This is just looking at momentum and looking at where price is going. Now, if price was making lower lows on lower RSI, that's a gamble to me. This did bounce, but it's just an example of what I'm looking at here. We made lower lows, lower price, no div there at all. That to me is a knife catch. You're hoping this thing reverses. It did, but that's to me less probable than this multi-month continuous bullish divergence at the bottom here. Here's another example you rarely see with crypto, but this is how a lot of stuff looked against Ethereum. This is Balancer Ethereum, where you have these multi-month drops below 30. Now, none of this was necessarily a bullish divergence. You didn't get a higher low in price here the entire time, right? But eventually probability kicks in and it says, okay, RSI is at 20. Can this go lower? Maybe, right? RSI is at 15. Can this go lower? Maybe. RSI is at 10, all-time low. Can this go lower? Maybe. But eventually, right, probability catches up with this. And this didn't even bounce significantly on price, but it did eventually bounce. And look how RSI rebounded incredibly strong. So it reset that entire bear trend back. The RSI went back to 50 and says it's okay to go down again because momentum isn't so overstretched, oversold this entire time. So this is another one to watch for on the other end of the spectrum. You don't see it too often, but when you do, it's usually pretty obvious because things look so despair. To see a multi-month RSI below 30 is really something. And here's the divergence cheat sheet. I've done a video on this specifically, like I already said, but it's worth just taking a mental image of or studying if you don't know what these are yet. But there are regular divergences, hidden divergences, and then exaggerated divergences where price hits the same high or the same low, but the RSI looks different. So just worth taking a mental note of that. Like I already mentioned, you can see chart patterns or patterns, inverted head and shoulders in this case, in RSI relative to what's showing up in price. Usually it'll match what's going on here, but it's a lot cleaner to look at this than to look at this, right? This was a droopy, I called it a triple bottom, even though it necessarily wasn't a triple bottom. It was more of a double bottom, but RSI was telling you, you had a bull div here, you had your level to watch, not only on the W horizontal here, but also on RSI. So you can treat that as a breakout trade to the upside. As this stands now, price is continually moving higher with lower RSI. So is that a mega bearish divergence? No, but is it a type of bearish divergence? Certainly, I'd think so. RSI is less high, not as high as it was previously, despite price moving higher. So we can bear div this thing all the way to 78 and cancel out this bear div, right? So that's why you always got to be careful with divs in ranges. What you want is extremes, like here even, because remember, when we're consolidating or sideways, momentum gets much murkier. And here's another pattern. Again, you're coming off of this bullish trend with a bearish divergence, just a series of lower and lower and lower stuff, squeezing. Eventually that flips into a bullish div and you do get a bounce off of that. But this took a ton of time to play out, right? This took 6-7 months to play out. So you can't always take action immediately when you see this stuff. You just have to think, okay, this is where we're at on RSI. How's that going to affect my trading today, tomorrow, a week from now? What am I looking for? And BTC, where it sits here, my expectation is a drop. So I want to see RSI go sub 50 again. On the daily, I want to see this thing go into oversold again, retracing all the way to 40, whatever the Kijun is here, before the cloud resets. That's my own bias right now. I want this thing to go down. So I'm happy that RSI is curling, is weakening momentum up here. So if I'm looking to buy the dip, I'm watching how does this react when RSI hits 50? When it resets the entire move up on momentum, does it hold at 50 or does it drop below, right? And then does it hold at 30 or does it drop below? Do we get a bull div anywhere in here in the future on the daily? What does it look like? Those are all the things that are in the back of my head for something like this on BTC. For altcoins like AVAX, just an example, that are in like parabolic mania, FOMO, euphoria, it tends to get easier, once this thing gets to extremes above 90, below 10, near 10. Anybody paying attention to RSI is thinking, yeah, am I crazy? What am I doing up here, right? look where it got historically as well in February. RSI way up there at 97. Hit a similar level, maybe 97.5 recently. But it's more of a sanity check than like I need to sell everything now or I need to buy everything now. It's just a probability game, outcomes. Can momentum continue to go to infinity with prices up 4x from the bottom, right? 5x from the bottom. It's a way to look at this and say, yeah, momentum is high and it's higher than it's ever been, and it probably can't go much higher, so this thing's probably going to retrace. So hopefully this is helpful. Hopefully you can use RSI in a valuable way to make some informed trading decisions. Lastly, let me just mention the ETH-BTC fund and DeFi portfolio I trade for Techemy Capital and Enzyme.finance, a non-custodial portfolio management solution where you can see everything, including AUM, performance, allocation, all the vaults I'm in, including Yearn vaults, Comp vaults, Aave vaults, all the coins I'm trading here, all of the trades I make as well in the trades tab below. That's all I have for this one. Like, dislike, comment, share, subscribe, and happy trading.